Good to see everyone this morning. If you are a visitor, my name is Dan. I'm the teaching pastor. Get this awesome opportunity to open up God's Word. Now, you see the title of this is the greatest sermon. Let me go ahead and just snuff out. If you think that I'm saying I'm going to give you the greatest sermon you've ever heard, that is wrong, okay? I'm going to do my best, but I'm talking about one of the greatest sermons that we see in God's Word. And it is one that many of you who have been raised in the church may be familiar with. It's called the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount is one of the first big teaching times that we have of Jesus. I'll talk a little bit more about it in a second as well as we get into it. Let me encourage you with this in your own personal life during this week. I'm going to encourage you to read through the Sermon on the Mount, I don't know, a couple times. Take a little bit at a time. It covers Matthew chapter 5 through 7. And you're going to see it deals with a whole lot of different things. And it's an amazing, amazing teaching that Jesus gives. And at the heart of it, it's about how we act here as followers of Christ. It's about how we live our life as a follower of God. Obviously, at this time, there weren't technically Christians, but there were people who were faithful to God, and Jesus was talking to them, and all the teaching that we're going to see. As we know, after Christ dies and goes to heaven, the believers begin to be called Christians, and so we still see how we should still walk and live our lives as we go about our everyday life. Now, there is a theologian who summarized the greatest sermon, the Sermon on the Mount. He summarized the purpose this way. His name is N.T. Wright. He says this, that the point of it was to transform the present earth into the place of beauty and delight that God has always intended. To transform earth into a place of beauty and delight that God always intended. And that those who follow Jesus are to begin to live by this rule now, not wait for Jesus to show up in the future and to set up his kingdom here on earth. No, we're to start living this now. It says it's a summons to live in the present in the way that will make sense in God's promised future, because that future arrived with Jesus of Nazareth. This is about how we live our life here on earth while God has us here. This is on our interactions. This isn't how we decide things. And I want to say this right up front. A few things about this. Number one, the Sermon on the Mount could come across as a very moralistic teaching, that we should read this and study this and get all of those moralistic things right. You know, that we're doing the good thing, we're talking the right way, we're doing all this. These are true things, but they're rooted in something deeper. It's not just talk right, think right, look right, do right. All of that is rooted in our love for God and our commitment to following him with our life. So lest you look at this and say, wow, it's just a bunch of really, do this, don't do that, do this, don't do that. There's something deeper, and we have to keep that in mind as we look over these next 6 weeks, look at some of these specific areas. Now, the other thing I'll tell you about this is, as I've been reading the Sermon on the Mount, this has been on my heart for about 2 years to really start doing a series on this, because it is going to go against everything your gut and your flesh tells you to do. It is going to be fingernails down a chalkboard, sandpaper down your back, whatever it is, that thing that drives you crazy because it's so counter to how you feel. If we are to live this out, it's going to go completely the opposite of what your feelings and your flesh tells you to do. So we're going to start with the Sermon on the Mount. Now, as we start today, we're going to be talking about one of the first sections where Jesus talks about being salt and light. So there's a little teaser for what we're talking about today, and we'll explain what that means. I don't know how many of you sit around and ponder this question, but what makes a person attractive? I know most of you are probably sitting around and thinking this all the time like I am. Really, I don't. But you get the idea. I don't know how many of us have ever actually sat down and thought, what makes a person attractive? And just to clarify, I don't mean necessarily just romantic. That's one area. But what makes a person attractive as a friend? What makes a person attractive as somebody I want to do business with? What makes a person attractive that I want to follow them, or I want them to be a follower of me? What causes a person to be attractive? I think there's a lot of different things that we could spell out with that. sometimes there's this intangible, strange force that they have about them that they don't even try, and yet they attract people. Let me tell you, back in about 1997, I was serving at a camp in Maryland, children's camp. Worked there all summer, had a lot of fun, called River Valley Ranch in central Maryland. As I was a counselor there for a couple years, one year I came in 97, and I'm waiting for all the other new counselors to show up. I didn't know half of them. It was always a new batch every year. I was one of the ones that was there for several years. And so we're waiting, and we're meeting all the new counselors. And then this small brown car, almost looked like a clown car, pulls up with another counselor in it. And this guy gets out of it. He's about 6'2". He has long red, blaze red curly hair, and this massive smile on his face. He comes walking in, and he introduces himself and says this, "Hi, my name is Happy." This is his birth name, Happy. He's like, "Hi, I'm a counselor," and I get to know him, and his name is Happy Peterson, okay? Happy is a pastor still out in Ohio right now. Happy was this guy, he was one of the first people I met that there was just something about him that attracted people. He didn't even try, and he would attract people. It was crazy. Now, he looked a lot like Alexi Lawless or Carrot Top, the comedian back then and stuff. He doesn't have that all now. He got his hair cut and all that. But he just was this guy who was life-giving, and you enjoyed just being around. I mean, he's the one guy, and you know these type people that will walk in a room, and they could just stand in the corner, and you give it 20 minutes, and there's going to be about 5 people that have just made their way over to talk to them and be with them, and they enjoy it, and hey, he was an extrovert. He loved people. So you look at this, and there's those types of people in your life that have that attraction to them. It's an X factor. It's unknown. It's invisible about them. Yes, we can talk about the things that attract us to people physically. 6-pack abs. That was, just so you know, Beth didn't marry me for my 6-pack abs. Yeah, we were blessed with the Auburn keg, okay? Now, there are those physical characteristics. Maybe it's not just physical characteristics that attracts us to a person. It's a personality. You know the type personality, you're like, I love people like that. Man, I just want to be around them and spend all this time with them. Maybe it's just their mission in life that's attractive to you. You want to be around people that have the same burning passion in their life as you do. Or maybe it's just they've got this mission in life that you really are interested in, and you want to be close to them because of that. Attraction is a science. Psychologists study this all the time. If you were to go on the internet and type in, laws of attraction or what attracts people to people, you're going to find article after article after article with conflicting results of what attracts a person to other people. Just like attraction, though, there are also those unknown, invisible as well as visible characteristics that make you be repelled by a person. You know what I'm talking about? I want you to think for a second. What is that one characteristic that if a person has it, I am going to stay away from them like Dan Albin from a diet? Think of that, I want you to think about what that trait is. Maybe it's an outward trait. I don't know. Maybe it's a personality trait. They're narcissistic. They're a pessimist. They're a Yankees fan. Sorry, I had to throw that in there. Baseball season's coming. So I don't have that extra grind against Yankee fans, but whatever. You know that there are certain things about people that repel you. They're bossy. They're never wrong. You know what I'm talking about. And when you meet this person within the first 5 minutes, it may be your first time meeting them, you're like, yep, I can go the rest of my life without you being a part of it. It repels you. Maybe there's just something, as I said, there's that invisible thing sometimes that attracts us to people. Sometimes there's just this gut feeling about a person that you're like, yeah, I don't want to be around that. I don't want to be around that. You can't necessarily explain it, but it repels you. We're talking about attraction and repelling today. Because one thing is true about both of these, being attracted to a person or be repelled from them, is that they emote reactions from us. They emote reaction. We can't just have that person there. We're either going to be drawn to them, want relationship with them, be around them, or we're going to physically get up and walk away from them. It emotes a reaction no matter what. Today we want to take a look at this law of attraction, the law of being repelled through the lens of our faith and our following of God, because how we live out our faith and following Jesus is going to either attract or repel people. How we live out our faith day to day, how we treat other people, the causes in our life, what is important to us is going to either attract or repulse people. And sometimes that repulsion, I'll give you a little, again, another preview here. Sometimes that repulsion is not a bad repulsion. You'll see what I mean when we get into today. My big idea this morning is simply this, that our interactions and actions cause reactions. Our interactions and actions cause reactions. Our interactions with other people, with groups of people, our actions towards them, how we treat them, are going to cause a reaction to them. And we want to look at this through the lens of faith as we see in the Sermon on the Mount, the greatest sermon that Christ began his ministry with. As I said, we are going to talk about salt and light today, but I have to set something up first. If you are familiar with God's Word, if you're familiar with the Sermon on the Mount, you know that it starts with a long passage of verses that we have called in Christian circles the Beatitudes. And the Beatitudes are, blessed are the poor in spirit, blah, 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 blah. Blessed are the blah, 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 blah. Blessed are the blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to give you a list of those in a second. But here's the thing. Let me set it up before this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the Beatitudes because I really want to encourage you to read these on your own this week. There's some great truth in it, but it sets up what we're talking about today. So what happened? Jesus is about to begin his ministry. As we start into Matthew 5, it says that he's walking around with his disciples, and a crowd of people are following him around. There's something attractive about him. And no matter where he goes, people want to be around. Now, some were there because they wanted to see him do miracles and healings and all that, but some people, there was something about Jesus that they couldn't shake. They were attracted. And so, as Jesus is walking around, this crowd of people are following him. That's got to be a little odd. You know, you're walking everywhere you want to go, and you've got this crowd following you all the time. But it says that he came to a hill, and he goes up on this hill, the mount, if you will, and he sits down, and he takes advantage of this, and he teaches. He begins teaching. And as I said, in Matthew chapter 5, verses 3 through 12, he sets out these things called the Beatitudes. And I want to put a list up on the screen for you of what these are. These are characteristics that he lays out of people who are faithful to God. If you are following God, if you have committed your life to following Jesus, these are traits that we are to seek and to strive to have in our life. I'm going to tell you this right now, that I am not perfect in all of these in my life. You aren't either. But these are things for us to strive towards. The list says, blessed are the poor and in need of God. They realize their dependency on God. It says that they are blessed. It says, blessed are those who mourn, those that are humble, those who desire justice, not just for themselves, but for other things. Those that are merciful to other people. Those that are pure in heart, they seek to be pure and holy and clean. Those that are peacemakers, not those that are starting fights online or in the River East or whatever it is. Those that do right and are persecuted for it. Those that do right. And when they know that by doing the right thing, they're going to be persecuted for it. But guess what? They do it anyway because it's more important for them to do right. And Jesus spells out, you know what? These are the characteristics for us to strive for. These are the things that we are blessed for. This is how you go about your everyday life, walking around town, going to work, going to school, going wherever you're going. These are the characteristics that we must strive to have. This is what a follower of Jesus acts like naturally. It's in us to be able to do this. We're going to have to put some effort into being these. So I want to encourage you to spend some time gleaning on these Beatitudes because these set up the characteristics of a follower of Christ. And now Jesus transitions into this section where he says, now here's how your interactions, if you do all these things, if you are these characteristics, here is how it should be impacting your life and your world now. And he picks up, and we're going to pick up in verse 13. You can follow along in the Hope Church app. We will have the verses up here on the screen. It says this, you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. Why on earth is Jesus talking about one of my favorite things, salt? Okay? Why on earth is he, in this New Testament time period, back in the early, before it's even 100 AD or CE or whatever you want to say, before it is that, he's talking about salt. Well, if you know anything about the culture here, salt was a very, very important item to have. There were no Frigidaire or Samsung refrigerators back in this day. Therefore, if you had meat to feed your family, salt was very important. I don't know how many of you sit around and think about curing bacon or curing meats or any of that, but as a barbecuer, I do. And what you will find out is that you get a piece of meat, you can take this stuff and salt, and it begins a curing process. What does the salt do? The salt kills decay and deterioration of the meat. That meat, if we were to just leave it out there, open to air and exposure, it's going to decay, smell, rot, all that nastiness. You put salt on it. The salt begins to preserve. It begins to allow this meat to go longer. You can smoke it and it'll last a long time. Salt was very important. But I think there's something with this that Jesus says, you are the salt of the earth. Note, he did not say you should be the salt of the earth. He says you are the salt of the earth. If you're my follower, if you have these beatitude traits that you're striving towards, you're going to be the salt of the earth. You're going to be someone who preserves the earth from deterioration and decay. Now that's deep there. You are going to be partly responsible for slowing the decay going on in our world. I don't know if you've noticed, but there's a little bit of decay going on in our world. Okay, there's a lot of decay going on in our world. And one of the roles of followers of God are to preserve the world. Remember, the definition I gave at the very beginning that N.T. Wright said was the fact that we were to live it out the way that God intended this world to be, this place of beauty and peace. We are to live that out, and part of doing that is slowing the decaying process that happens over time. You study history. You see great societies deteriorate, crumble, fall apart, and then a new empire raises, and that begins to decay and deteriorate and fall apart. You are the salt of the earth. You are a preserver. You slow down decay in our world. Followers of Jesus, when living up to what we are called, have to begin to stand against things we know cause deterioration in our world. A deterioration of morality, a deterioration of unity and the love that God desires the world to be filled with. We are partly responsible for this. We cannot passively stand by with things such as the more visible things we see of poverty and homelessness and human trafficking, hunger, murder. We can't passively stand by and say, well, we're Christian, we're over here. We can't be passive. Part of that salt of the earth is that we are a preserver. Martin Luther King had a statement that I just stumbled across this past year that I loved. He said this: the church must be reminded that it is not the master or the servant of the state, but rather the conscience of the state. Now, I'm not getting political, just for anyone that might be getting to sweat and think, oh no, here it comes. I'm not getting into politics, okay? I am becoming more apolitical by the day. But I am all about the kingdom of God. That I can stand behind. And what Martin Luther King's saying here is, you know what? Too often we become slaves to the state as the church, or we become the ones that try to tell them, lord over them. You know, we have a superiority complex. And the reality is that part of our role is to be the conscience of the state, that regardless of where we stand on a political issue, because it changes all the time, regardless where we stand, good is good, bad is bad. And we need to fight for the good. We need to stand up for what we know, that if we had no political affiliation or opinion for that matter, the opinion that matters most is what God thinks of these things and how we can be the hands and feet of Christ in them. Salt of the earth, preserver, one who fights decay and deterioration in our world. But I don't know if you know this, salt has another purpose. Salt adds flavor. And that is why I have a problem, because I love salt. Salt adds flavor. Probably, if you gave me a salt lick, one of those things the cows, have out in the field, I would probably salt that. I like salt. It makes things come alive. It's like, wow, this is good. Oh my goodness, this is amazing. It came to life. It's a circus in my mouth. It brings flavor to things. We are to bring flavor to this earth. Should it be joy? Should it be happiness? Should it be love? Rooted in God's love. Back to the world around us that wants the opposite. It wants division. It wants fighting. It wants anger, disunity. We have the opportunity as the salt of the earth, ones rooted in the Beatitudes, to be the ones that bring flavor back to this world. Jesus says you're the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, if it loses its saline property, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. He's making a statement here. It seems that back then, salt could lose its saltiness. They used to store salt in these big rooms, and what would happen is they would start taking off the top, for whatever purposes, meat and all of that, and by the time they would get to the bottom, after rain, after dirt gets mixed in with it, the salt towards the bottom would have lost flavoring, and so what would they do with this now useless salt? They'd throw it out in the road. It worked almost as a mulch. We don't want vegetation growing here on the road, so we're going to put this useless salt out there. It brought death, if you will. It smothered things. It didn't add flavor. No, it smothered things. I hope that is not us, because as a church, we're called to be more. There are many Christians who are salt substitute. You know what I'm talking about? The substitute salt. Some of you may use this. I find it offensive. Salt substitute, it's not really salt, but it adds kind of flavor, but it doesn't really do what salt was meant, with that whole preserving piece of it. And sometimes as Christians, we think, well, you know what? I'm going to show how great a Christian I am by coming to church or giving, or hey, I'll even serve. And we put our hope that our saltiness is going to be based on these external things that are rooted in this hope that maybe people will want to become a follower of Jesus because of all these good things that I'm doing. And we put hope in it ourselves. We think, well, I'm a good Christian because I'm doing this, and this. But if it is not rooted in a love for God and a desire for Him, I don't care if you're here at church every week. It doesn't matter. I don't care if you give $1 million. It doesn't matter if it isn't rooted in a love for following Jesus. That is our true motivation. That we are followers of Him, that we've committed our lives to Him, and we are not salt substitute. No, we're real salt. And that salt preserves and it brings flavor. Jesus goes on, and He uses another illustration here of what the church and those that follow Him are supposed to be doing. In verse 14, He says this: "You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." He uses this illustration of light. Light gives direction. It's why we use flashlights if we're camping. Or if we're in our house and the power has gone out, we don't try to just sort of meander our way through. We pull out light. We pull out our phone that has that flashlight on it. It gives direction. Light also reveals things. When you're walking around in the dark, it reveals things you should probably not step on. The Legos that your kid left out, yes, it's going to reveal them. It reveals potential tragedy and pain and agony and stubbed toes. But I don't know if you thought about this. Light also attracts. Light attracts. There's a reason why when some of us go camping, we do that campfire. Some of us just like get all reflective and artsy all of a sudden, and we just sit there and we just stare into this fire. And there's something about, especially if you're out in complete darkness and there's no light around you, that there's something about a fire that attracts people to it. Light has multiple purposes. Light gives direction. It reveals things, and it attracts. Just like salt had purposes, light does too. Light can bring relief from fear, and it draws us to something bigger and brighter that should be in our lives, and that is this love of God. That there's something different in us that we cannot hide, but everybody sees. It is out there for everyone to see. If you have been going to Hope since, we've had the opportunity to serve here, one of the first sermons that I talked to you about was this, epiphany moment for me when I was walking through Lowe's. And I walked past the lighting section. And I said that there's one thing that is never said in the lighting section in church, and that is people going in there and going, wow, man, it's pretty dim in here. Let's get another light in here. The lighting section doesn't need more lights. It's bright enough. That light was created to go into a dark place to illuminate it and draw people to it. And we spend time around because we're reading or whatever. Light is important. The church too often becomes a lighting section where all the lights hang out together and the world grows ever dark around us and there's nothing. We're hiding it in here in a church building instead of going out into the place where it was meant to go. Into the darkness. You are to be the light of the world. They should see our good deeds and glorify our Father in heaven because they see how we treat people, how we interact, how we love, how we seek to do great in this world. You are the light of the world. Are you a dim bulb? Are you saltless? I don't know. That's for us to evaluate our lives. Is there anything attractive in our lives that when people look at us, they say, man, that's what I want. I want to know what's behind why they act this way, why they talk this way, why they treat people this way. I want to be around that. Those of you that are in school and here, high school or even college, there should be something in your life that is different than what everyone sees around you, that is based in your love for God. Your interactions with the world, whether you be light and salt, is going to cause a reaction. There are going to be people that see that in your life and are going to be attracted and want it, and you're going to get these great opportunities to share why it is that you choose to help fight against decay and why there's this brightness in your soul that attracts people to you. You get that opportunity, but remember at the beginning I said that sometimes we are attracted, but sometimes we aren't. There are going to be those that are repulsed by our goodness. And that's part of the deal. It's unfortunate. Jesus said people will hate you because of me. They're going to hate you because of me. You're just trying to love people and embrace them and help them, and they're going to hate that. That's an eye-opener for me. But it's no excuse for us to not be as salty as we can be and as bright a light as we can be. What would have happened if the church decided to not be salt and light? I'm going to give you some very practical examples of this that I looked into. What would have happened if the church decided to not be salt and light? There were things going wrong in the world that somebody said, because of my love for God and because of my love for other people, I have to do something about this. And they did something. Hospitals. Did you know that the concept of a hospital started because of church leaders all the way back in the 300s? They began to think, you know what, there's a lot of sick people here. We need to get them together in this area and we can take care of them because nobody else is doing it. The government wasn't doing it. And they said, we have to do something about this. In 369 AD, a group of monks actually began what's seen as the origin of the hospital. Imagine if they didn't choose to be salt and light, to care for people. Well, what else? Education. Education, again in the 300s, started by church leaders. They wanted kids to be able to read, to write. And they said, well, we can do it. Nobody else is doing it. So we're going to choose to be salt and light and help these children to learn, to read. And so in the 300s, that happened. Even in the United States, I don't know if you know this history, but just 40 minutes down the road is this little university called Yale that was started as a pastoral college, as was Harvard, as was Princeton. They were pastoral colleges in their origin. They were started by those that wanted to train pastors. They aren't that anymore. Anyway, they still have that, but they've definitely gone, totally different direction now. But here's the reality. It was started by those that chose to be salt and light in the world. Prison reform. In the 1800s, a woman, Elizabeth Fry, saw the deplorable conditions of prisons and how people were being treated, that children were in prison, that adults were in prison, and they were defecating and eating and sleeping all in the same room that was never cleaned, and the horrible conditions. And she said, this isn't right. Something needs to be done because these are God's children and they deserve to be treated differently. And so she began a prison reform movement in the UK in the 1800s. Trade unions, Terence Vincent Powderly saw how people were being traded back in the 1800s, or how they were being treated as they did their job and the horrible conditions, even, children, which I'll talk about in a second, how they were being treated in jobs. And so he decided to start a trade union, an idea that would fight for the rights to have people treated as God would want them to be treated, that they would get Sundays off, that they could go to church. What else? Abolition of slavery and child labor. Rich Ostler, George Bull, an Anglican priest who decided it is wrong that children are having to work. They're being beaten at their job. They're working 12 and 16 hours a day, no education. They're working in factories. That's not how God intended children to be treated. And because of our love for them and being created in the image of God, we have to stop something here. And they step into it to be salt and to light. Orphanages, even as much as in 1729 in the United States, a group of nuns, after one of the wars with the French and the Indians, saw these children that had no one to take care of them, and they decided to get them together in a home to be salt and light and to love them as Jesus did. Confronting racism. Again, these are not political issues. These are moral, religious issues. Confrontation of racism, even the Quakers, all the way back in the 1600s in America, began to speak out against the atrocity of human slavery. William Wilberforce, Martin Luther King, one's motivated not by a political angle, but by love for God, said, we have to step into this. And they did. And they were salt and light. Imagine if those people did not decide to step into this. No hospitals, no education system, prison reform, trade unions, abolition of slavery, orphanages, confrontation of racism. You could go on and on. Many of these people took steps based on their faith. They chose to be salty and bright and to stop the moral decay going on in our world and to have something that attracted. But, let me throw in, just because they did this did not make them popular. There were those that spoke out against them, those that stepped up in the case of racism, that were scorned and ridiculed for being abolitionists. They were ridiculed for doing good, as Christ would have us do. So my questions for you as we close is this, is how have you impacted the world you live in? How have you delayed the decay that you see around you? Have you stepped into that? Because to be salt and light, we must. It's part of who we are. To delay decay. around us? How have your following of Jesus impacted those around you? How have they impacted your community, your home, your workplace? Are people drawn to your faith, or do they resist you because of your faith? I can tell you one thing is that if you choose to be salt and light, it's not going to go without some sort of reaction. If there is no reaction, we have to evaluate ourselves and what's motivating how we live our life. My closing challenge for you is simply this, that I want us to be attractive but motivated by a broken heart. Be attractive, seek to be salt, seek to be light in our world, in our community, in our lives. Seek to be attractive by living out your love for Christ and treating people the way that He would. But do so with a broken heart, because our world is decaying. Our world is broken. But we cannot stand around and do nothing. Because if we are following Jesus, it would be sin for us to do nothing. And that's what you and I are called to. I don't know where you are in your walk with Jesus. Some in here today, this may be new to you, even confronting this whole thing of Jesus, but I want to lay this out. We believe that God sent His Son Jesus out of love for us and our broken condition, which was caused by something called sin. And He sent His Son to take a punishment for us that all of us deserved. And He, in His love and His justice, decided to send His Son to take our punishment for us. And the reason for it was this: out of His love, but out of a desire to have a relationship with you. Doesn't matter who you are, what your past is, what your present is. He loves you and wants a relationship with you. And He says, you can be my follower by turning from your ways and saying, I'm yours, and making that commitment. And that's what a follower of Jesus is those that have turned from living for themselves and have turned towards living for Christ. If you've never done that, I hope today's the day that you'll choose to step across that line. And we'd love to talk to you more about that. Feel free to talk to us or send a note on your response envelope. We will get in contact with you. Most important decision you will ever make. Let's be salt and light this week. Let's pray. Father, thank you for giving us this opportunity just in your word. I thank you for your teaching here in the Sermon on the Mount. Lord, open our eyes, even those of us that have walked with Christ a long time, as that how salty and how bright are we? Lord, is our life stopping decay? Is it preserving? Is it adding flavor that is motivated and based in our love for you? Have we been bright, or have we been putting a bowl of fear and embarrassment over the light that we love you and we have given our life to you? Lord, what is it that we need to do to be bright in our world, not hidden, visible for all to see? Jesus, we ask for your help to be people of impact. That people will know we're Christians simply by how we interact with them. And Lord, even those that may be repulsed by the goodness in our life, Lord, may that be an encouragement to us that we're doing the right thing. When we meet against resistance, we know we have an enemy who wants us to be silenced, to be snuffed out, and to be saltless. And Lord, that we would not relent, that we would, out of our love for you, say we can't do anything opposed to this. We have to live out the love of Christ every day. Father, help us to be salt and light this week and to not be ashamed of that. And we ask this in your name. Amen.